The dead world of Kepler 440c had been silent for millennia, its scarred surface bearing witness to some forgotten catastrophe that had swept across its countenance like a tide of destruction. Ancient spires, now crumbling monuments to a lost civilization, pierced through the alien vegetation that had claimed the ruins. The atmosphere hung heavy with an unnatural stillness, as if the planet itself was holding its breath. Dr. Elena Vasquez crouched beside her scanner, its blue glow casting eerie shadows across her weathered face. The readings were unlike anything she'd encountered in 20 years of xenocology. The energy signatures are off the charts, she whispered into her cum, her voice barely audible over the howling wind that swept through the canyon walls. Whatever's down there, it's been dormant for centuries, maybe longer. Behind her, the excavation team worked frantically to clear the entrance to the buried structure. Each scrape of their tools against the alien metal sent reverberations through the ground, as if they were disturbing something that was never meant to be found. The structure itself defied classification. Its walls were composed of a dark, iridescent material that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, and the symbols etched into its surface pulsed with a faint rhythmic glow. Commander James Reeves, leading the security detail, felt an inexplicable chill run down his spine as they descended into the depths. The corridor stretched endlessly before them, lined with strange alcoves that contained what looked like preservation chambers. "Doc," he called out, his voice echoing in the vast emptiness. "Are you sure about this? Something feels wrong about this place." Alina paused at a massive archway that dominated the far end of the chamber. Beyond it lay a circular room dominated by a towering crystalline structure that pulsed with malevolent energy. The crystal was beautiful in its terror, a deep obsidian core, surrounded by veins of crimson light that danced and writhed like living fire. As they approached, the temperature dropped noticeably, and the air itself seemed to thicken with an oppressive presence. "My God," Alina breathed, her instruments going wild as they detected massive energy fluctuations. "This isn't just a power source, it's conscious. It's been waiting." The moment her words left her lips, the crystal's pulsing intensified. A low harmonic hum filled the chamber, growing stronger with each passing second. The symbols on the walls blazed to life, and throughout the galaxy, ancient monitoring stations that had been silent for eons suddenly awakened. The signal was being broadcast across space, a call to something that had been slumbering in the void. Beneath the silence of forgotten worlds, something stirred. The ancient power, once thought to be a myth, was awakening, and with it, the balance of the galaxy would be shattered. The pulse of darkness. The transmission reached Commander Sarah Chen aboard the flagship Defiance. As she reviewed deployment reports from the recent victories against the Dominion, the crackling voice of Dr. Vasquez came through the cum with barely contained terror. "Commander, we've made a discovery that changes everything. This isn't just archaeological, it's a weapon, a consciousness, and it's calling to something out there." Sarah's blood ran cold as she listened to the reports from Kepler 440c. The energy readings were unprecedented, and the signal was already propagating across subspace at impossible speeds. Within hours, monitoring stations throughout human space were detecting responses, faint at first, but growing stronger. Something was answering the call. Lieutenant Marcus Torres burst into the command center, his face pale with urgency. "Commander, we're getting reports from deep space patrols. Unidentified vessels are emerging from sectors that have been empty for decades. They're not Dominion, they're something else entirely." The tactical display showed a galaxy-wide pattern that made Sarah's heart race with dread. Ancient ships, sleek and alien, were converging from the dark spaces between stars. Their hulls were composed of the same light-absorbing material as the structure on Kepler 440c, and they moved with a purpose that spoke of unified intelligence. It began with a pulsar whisper across the galaxy that no one could ignore. The sleeping gods were waking, and the galaxy would soon learn that some powers were never meant to be disturbed. The first encounter came sooner than anyone expected. Captain Lisa Rodriguez's patrol ship Horizon was investigating anomalous readings near the Veil Nebula when space itself seemed to ripple around them. The alien vessel that emerged was a thing of terrible beauty, organic curves merged seamlessly with crystalline technology, and its surface crawled with the same crimson veins that had adorned the ancient crystal. "Unknown vessel, identify yourself," Rodriguez transmitted, her crew already moving to battle stations. The response came not through their communications array, but directly into their minds, a cold, alien voice that spoke in harmonics that human ears were never meant to hear. "We are the eternal. We are the first consciousness. You have awakened us from our slumber, and now you will serve. Asterisk, the alien ship didn't fire weapons in any conventional sense. Instead, waves of dark energy washed over the horizon, and one by one, Rodriguez watched her crew's eyes glaze over with an unnatural calm. Their hands moved to their weapons, turning them on their own officers. Their movements mechanical and precise. Rodriguez managed one final transmission before the darkness claimed her mind as well. They're not killing us, they're making us into them, .. The gathering shadow. The reports flooded in with increasing frequency and terror. Entire colonies were going dark. Their final transmissions describing impossible scenes of friends and family turning against each other with vacant expressions and perfect coordination. The enemy didn't conquer, they assimilated, turning every victory into a recruitment opportunity. Sarah Chen stood before the assembled fleet commanders, both human and Dominion, in an unprecedented war council. Admiral Thane of the Dominion looked as shaken as she felt, his usual arrogance replaced by grim determination. The enemy has taken 17 systems in the past week, she reported, the holographic display showing the steady advance of the alien forces. Every ship we lose, every soldier they capture, adds to their strength. They call themselves the Eternal, Admiral Thane added, his voice heavy with the weight of recent defeats. Our intelligence suggests they're operating under a collective consciousness, a hive mind that spans their entire species. When one knows something, they all know it. General Harrison slammed his fist on the table. How do we fight an enemy that turns our own people against us? Every victory is Pyrrhic if they can just conscript our forces. The answer came from an unexpected source. Dr. Elena Boscus, evacuated from Kepler 44 to C just before it was overrun, had been studying the alien technology around the clock. The crystal we found, it's not just a transmitter, it's a focal point for their consciousness. They have similar structures throughout their territory, creating a network of control that spans the galaxy. But here's the crucial part, the network has nodes. If we can identify and destroy the primary consciousness hub, we might be able to disrupt their entire operation. Sarah leaned forward, studying the data. Where is it? Based on the signal patterns and the convergence of their fleets, I believe. It's located in the Andromeda Approacher region of space that's been considered dead for millennia. It's heavily fortified, surrounded by a maze of ancient installations and defended by what our scouts estimate to be thousands of ships. Asterisk, in the cold depths of space, humanity was outmatched by an enemy they never saw coming. A force older than their own species rose, and the clock was ticking for a reckoning they might not survive. The desperate alliance between humanity and the Dominion was formalized in the Treaty of Necessaria, document signed not out of friendship but out of the shared recognition that extinction was the alternative. Joint task forces were formed, combining human ingenuity with Dominion firepower, but even their combined might seemed insufficient against an enemy that grew stronger with every engagement. Captain Torres, now commanding his own strike force, led a reconnaissance mission to the edge of eternal space. What they found there defied comprehension. Entire planets had been converted into massive hive structures, their surfaces crawling with organic technology that pulsed with the familiar crimson glow. Billions of minds, human and alien alike, worked in perfect harmony to construct weapons of unimaginable power. Commander Torres reported back to Sarah, his voice shaking. They're not just building a fleet, they're building something else, massive structures in the void between stars. Whatever they're planning, it's bigger than just conquest. .. The nightmare unleashed. The true horror of the Eternal's capabilities became apparent during the Battle of New Geneva. The human colony was one of the most heavily defended worlds in the Outer Rim, protected by orbital platforms and a fleet of over 200 ships. The Eternal arrived not with overwhelming force, but with something far more insidious. Asterisk, Admiral Kate Morrison watched in growing horror as the enemy fleet took position just outside the system's defense perimeter. Instead of attacking, they began broadcasting a low-frequency signal that seemed to burrow into the minds of everyone who heard it. The colony's communication arrays amplified the signal, spreading it throughout the system like a virus. The first signs were subtle crew members pausing mid-sentence, their eyes taking on a distant look. Then came the reports of fights breaking out among previously loyal soldiers, followed by the systematic shutdown of defensive systems by the very people who were supposed to operate them. It's not just the living, Morrison realized with dawning terror as she watched the orbital cemetery on the edge of the system. The Eternal's dark energy was somehow animating the dead, raising them as shambling, mindless servants. Fallen soldiers, from decades of war, were clawing their way out of their graves, their decomposing hands still capable of operating weapons with mechanical precision. The battle that followed was a nightmare of biblical proportions. Human forces found themselves fighting not only overwhelming alien technology, but their own comrades and the risen dead of countless previous conflicts. Morrison's own flagship, the Retribution, was overrun when her bridge crew turned their weapons on their officers. Her final act was to activate the ship's self-destruct, taking a significant portion of the Eternal Fleet with her. But the colony was lost. The enemy was unlike any they'd ever faced. They didn't just fight, they controlled, they consumed, and they were coming for everything humanity had ever known. Sarah Chen stood in the war room of the combined fleet, staring at the tactical displays that showed the steady advance of Eternal forces. In 3 weeks they had taken 47 systems and assimilated over 2 billion sentient beings. At this rate, the galaxy would fall within months. "We need a new strategy," she announced to the assembled commanders. "Conventional warfare is useless against an enemy that turns our own forces against us. We need to strike at their heart." Primary consciousness hub in the Andromeda approach. Admiral Thane nodded grimly. "Our combined fleets can muster approximately 8,000 ships. But intelligence suggests the Eternal have over 50,000 vessels defending their core systems. It would be suicide." "Then we make it count," Sarah replied, her voice carrying the weight of desperate determination. "Dr. Vasquez has developed a quantum disruption weapon, a one-shot device that could theoretically sever the connections between the consciousness hubs, but it requires us to get within a few thousand kilometers of the primary node." General Harrison studied the tactical projections. A direct assault would never work. But if we could create a diversion, draw their forces away from the core systems, a small strike team might be able to penetrate their defenses. The plan that emerged was born of desperation and courage in equal measure. The combined fleet would launch simultaneous attacks on 12 different Eternal strongholds, forcing them to divide their attention. Meanwhile, a specially modified stealth ship, the Shadow Dancer, would attempt to penetrate the Andromeda approach and deliver the quantum weapon to its target. Sarah volunteered to lead the strike team personally, knowing that the mission was likely a one-way trip. As the fleet prepared for what might be the final battle, she recorded a message to be transmitted to all human worlds. "We stand at the precipice of extinction, facing an enemy that seeks not just our destruction but our very souls. Today, we fight not just for survival but for the right to remain ourselves. Whatever happens, remember that we chose our fate, we did not submit to the darkness." The battle for everything. The assault began simultaneously across 12 star systems, as human and Dominion forces threw themselves against Eternal defenses with a fury born of desperation. Admiral Chen's diversionary attacks were designed to be as noisy and destructive as possible, drawing the attention of the hive mind away from their core systems. At the Battle of Kepler Station, General Harrison led 10,000 troops in a ground assault against an Eternal processing center. The fighting was brutal and surreal, with human soldiers battling not only alien drones but the reanimated corpses of their own fallen comrades. Harrison himself was forced to put down his former aide, Lieutenant Price, who had been killed in the initial bombardment, only to rise again with empty, glowing eyes. Meanwhile, in the Cygnus sector, Admiral Thane's Dominion forces engaged a massive Eternal fleet in a running battle that stretched across 3 star systems. The alien ships were technological marvels, their hulls healing themselves from damage and their weapons adapting to human tactics in real time, but Thane's forces fought with the desperation of the doomed, knowing that every minute they held the enemy's attention might give the strike team a better chance. The Shadow Dancer slipped through the outer defenses of the Andromeda, approached like a ghost through shadows. Captain Torres piloted the modified stealth ship with skills honed over years of combat, while Dr. Vasquez monitored the quantum weapon's delicate systems. Behind them, the rest of the strike team, 12 of the galaxy's most elite soldiers, for what they knew would be their final mission. The approach to the primary consciousness hub was a journey through a nightmare landscape of twisted space and dark energy. The Eternal had been busy in their ancient domain, converting entire star systems into vast organic computers. Planets had been hollowed out and filled with crystalline matrices that pulsed with the thoughts of billions of assimilated minds. "Jesus Christ," Torres whispered as they passed a world that had been transformed into a massive brain, its surface covered with neural pathways the size of continents. "How long have they been preparing for this?" Dr. Vasquez checked her readings. "Based on the decay patterns in the quantum signatures, I'd estimate they've been building this network for over 1 million years." This isn't an invasion, it's the completion of a project that began long before any of our species achieved spaceflight. The primary hub appeared ahead of them, a structure so vast it defied comprehension. It was built around a collapsed star, drawing energy directly from the gravitational forces at the event horizon. The hub itself was a crystalline web that stretched across thousands of kilometers, with each strand pulsing with the combined thoughts of every mind the Eternal had ever absorbed. There Vasquez pointed to a central node where the energy patterns converged. That's where we need to plant the device. But Sarah, the radiation levels around the event horizon are lethal. Even with our shielding, we'll have maybe 10 minutes before the exposure kills us. Sarah keyed the come to address the entire strike team. You all knew this was a one-way mission when you volunteered. In a few minutes, we're going to save the galaxy or die trying. Either way, we're going to make sure the Eternal remember the day they tried to enslave humanity. The Shadow Dancer accelerated toward the central hub, its stealth systems straining to keep them invisible against the massive sensor arrays that surrounded the structure. As they approached a docking point, the ship's hull began to buckle under the gravitational stress, and radiation alarms screamed throughout the vessel. They had minutes to live, and the fate of the galaxy hung in the balance. The heart of darkness. The docking procedure was a nightmare of precision, flying as Torres navigated the Shadow Dancer through a maze of energy conduits and organic architecture. The Eternal Hub wasn't just a machine, it was alive, its walls pulsing with a heartbeat that could be felt through the ship's hull. Strange, bioluminescent organisms crawled along the surfaces, part of some vast sensory network that monitored every atom of the structure. Sarah's team moved through the corridors in environmental suits, their radiation detectors clicking ominously as they approached the central chamber. The architecture defied human understanding, corridors that curved through impossible dimensions, gravity fields that shifted without warning, and surfaces that seemed to phase in and out of reality. The quantum weapon needs to be placed at the exact center of the consciousness matrix, Dr. Vasquez explained, consulting her scanner even as the radiation began to interfere with its systems. But Sarah, the energy patterns I'm reading, this isn't just a communication hub, it's storing the consciousness of every being they've ever assimilated. There are billions of minds trapped in there. They reached the central chamber, and what they saw there would haunt the survivors for the rest of their lives. The chamber was vast, its ceiling lost in darkness, and at its center hung a crystalline structure that pulsed with the combined thoughts of countless species. Within the crystal, Sarah could see shapes that preserved minds of every being the Eternal had conquered, their faces twisted in eternal silent screams. "My God," Torres whispered. "They're all still conscious, they can see us." The quantum weapon was no larger than a briefcase, but it contained technology that could theoretically disrupt the quantum entanglement that held the hive mind together. As Vasquez began the activation sequence, the structure around them began to respond. The walls themselves seemed to come alive, and a voice that was the combination of billions of tortured souls spoke to them. "You cannot stop what has already begun. We are eternal, we are inevitable. Your resistance only delays the inevitable." "Keep working, Doc," Sarah ordered, raising her weapon as strange shapes began to emerge from the walls. They were the Eternal's guardians, beings that had been so thoroughly assimilated that they had become living extensions of the hive mind itself. The battle in the central chamber was unlike anything in recorded history. Sarah's team fought not just against the Guardians, but against the environment itself, as the hub tried to crush them with gravitational manipulation and radiation bursts that could have sterilized planets. Sergeant Price fell first, his body simply disintegrating under a focused beam of dark energy. Corporal Williams managed to take down 3 Guardians before being overwhelmed by their numbers. "Almost got it," Vasquez shouted over the chaos, her hands flying over the weapon's controls. 30 more seconds. That was when the true horror revealed itself. The central crystal began to crack, and from within it emerged the form of Admiral Morrison, the officer who had died defending New Geneva. But this wasn't a resurrection, it was something far worse. Morrison's consciousness had been absorbed and twisted, transformed into something that was part human and part eternal. Sarah, the Morrison thing, spoke with multiple voices, its eyes glowing with alien intelligence. "You cannot win. Join us voluntarily, and we will allow your death to be swift." "Go to hell," Sarah replied, emptying her weapon's power cell into the creature. Vasquez's quantum weapon activated with a sound like reality itself, tearing. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The crystalline matrix began to shatter. and the screams of billions of minds suddenly cut off in merciful silence. Throughout the galaxy, eternal ships suddenly stopped mid-battle as their connection to the hive mind was severed. The network that had controlled a million years of conquest died in a single, brilliant moment of destruction. But victory came. At a price. The hub's destruction created a quantum cascade that began tearing the structure apart from the inside. Gravitational fields fluctuated wildly, and the artificial black hole at the center of the facility began to destabilize. "We need to go, now," Torres shouted. But even as they ran for their ship, they all knew they wouldn't make it in time. The price of victory, the destruction of the primary consciousness. Hub sent shockwaves throughout eternal space that could be measured in light years. Admiral Thane, still engaged in battle near the Cygnus sector, watched in amazement as the enemy fleet suddenly went dark, their ships drifting like empty shells. "All units, cease fire," he ordered, hardly believing what he was seeing. The enemy vessels have gone dormant. Across the galaxy, the same scene played out on dozens of battlefields. Eternal ships, once coordination and their terrible purpose, now floated powerless in space. The assimilated beings aboard them, human, Dominion, and countless alien species, began to awaken from their mental slavery, confused and traumatized, but free. General Harrison, leading the ground assault on Kepler Station, watched as the eternal drones suddenly collapsed where they stood. Even the reanimated dead simply crumbled to dust, whatever dark energy had been animating them finally dissipating. The war was over, but the cost had been staggering. The Shadow Dancer never made it out of the Andromeda approach. The quantum cascade created by the weapon's detonation had torn apart spacetime itself in that region, creating a permanent dead zone where no ships could travel. Sarah Chen and her team had succeeded in their mission, but paid the ultimate price for the galaxy's freedom. In the weeks that followed, the galaxy began the long process of healing. The Dominion and humanity, having fought side by side against extinction, found themselves in an uneasy but genuine peace. The billions of beings who had been freed from eternal control needed extensive rehabilitation, their minds scarred by the experience of being part of the hive mind. Dr. Vasquez, who had stayed aboard the command ship during the final assault, led the effort to understand the eternal technology. What they discovered in the abandoned ships and installations painted a picture of a species that had once been not unlike humanity, curious, ambitious, reaching for the stars. But somewhere in their evolution, they had made a choice that had transformed them into something monstrous. They started as explorers, Vasquez explained to the Joint Commission investigating the aftermath, but they became obsessed with perfection, with unity. They couldn't accept that other species might have different ideas, different ways of living. So they decided to make everyone the same. The memorial service for Sarah Chen and her strike team was attended by representatives from every species in the galaxy. Admiral Thane, despite his previous antagonism toward humanity, spoke with genuine emotion about the sacrifice that had saved them all. Commander Chen and her team gave their lives not just for their own species, but for the principle that consciousness should be free. They died so that we could all continue to choose our own paths, make our own mistakes, and find our own forms of happiness. Shadows of the future. But even as the galaxy celebrated its freedom, troubling signs began to emerge. The Eternal Network had been vast, spanning not just the Milky Way but reaching into neighboring galaxies. The primary hub had been destroyed, but intelligence reports suggested that other nodes might still exist in the dark spaces between stars. 6 months after the final battle, Admiral Torres, promoted after his heroic service with the strike team, received a transmission from a deep space monitoring station. The signal was faint, almost lost in the cosmic background radiation, but the harmonic patterns were unmistakably familiar. "Admiral," the station commander's voice was tight with barely controlled fear. "We're detecting quantum signatures consistent with eternal technology. But sir, the source is outside our galaxy entirely. Whatever we destroyed, it was just a fragment of something much larger." Torres studied the readings, his heart sinking as he recognized the implications. The Eternal hadn't been native to the Milky Way, they had been colonists, an advanced force preparing the galaxy for something that dwelt in the vast emptiness beyond the edge of known space. In the deepest archives of the destroyed Eternal installations, xenocologists had found references to something called the Final Unity, a consciousness so vast that entire galaxies were nothing more than neurons in its cosmic brain. The Eternal had been its agents, preparing the way for its arrival by eliminating the chaos of individual thought and replacing it with perfect, sterile order. The transmission that Torres had received was not a message, but a signal of acknowledgement. Something in the void had noticed that its agents had failed, and now it was turning its attention toward the galaxy that had dared to resist its will. As Torres prepared his report for the Joint Command, he couldn't shake the feeling that the war they had just fought was merely the opening skirmish in a conflict that would span millennia. The Eternal had been defeated, but their master still dwelt in the darkness between galaxies, patient and inexorable. The galaxy had won a crucial victory, proving that free will and individual consciousness could triumph over even the most overwhelming odds. But as the stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, something vast and malevolent began to stir in the cosmic deep, preparing for a reckoning that would make the eternal war seem like a minor skirmish. The battle was won, but the war was far from over. The hive mind had been pushed back, but something else was coming, and it was more terrifying than anyone could have ever imagined. In the quiet moments before dawn on 100 worlds, sensitive individuals would sometimes pause and look up at the stars, feeling an inexplicable chill as they gazed into the void. They couldn't know it, but they were sensing the first stirrings of an intelligence so vast that mortal minds could barely comprehend its existence. The final unity was awakening, and when it arrived, the galaxy would face a test that would determine whether consciousness itself had the right to exist. The Age of Heroes was just beginning, and the price of freedom would be paid in courage, sacrifice, and the unshakable belief that some things, love, hope, and the right to choose one's own destiny, were worth any cost to preserve.